In America, there are no longer any Republicans for Environmental Protection. Republicans for Environmental Protection do not exist anymore. They used to exist. This was their logo. But they have abolished themselves as of today, getting rid of the Republicans for Environmental Protection name, perhaps because it had started to sound like a laugh line. They have instead rechristened themselves Conserve America. I know the name sounds like a scam mortgage company that's going to trick your grandmother out of her house, maybe, or perhaps a Newt Gingrich Inc. scam direct fax campaign that pledges to give you a prestigious award if you mail Newt thousands of dollars. But Conserve America is actually the new name of the artist formerly known as Republicans for Environmental Protection. They've dropped ostentatiously the word Republican from their name. Before their big name change, this was their honorary board. It included 22 Republican members of Congress. Notice that 17 of the 22 are retired members of Congress. Yeah, it's a good question. How many current Republican members of Congress want to be known as caring about environmental issues? Just in the first year after taking control of the House, Republicans in the House voted to strip environmental protections more than 150 times. The thing is, this all seems to have happened to the Republican Party kind of fast. It was only the last Republican election when the Republican ticket, remember, was running on cap and trade.
Joe Lieberman and I, my favorite Democrat, and I have proposed legislation which is called cap and trade.
So this cap and trade, that there will be incentives for people to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's a free market approach.
He's got a good cap and trade policy that he supports.
It was only 2008. The Republican ticket in favor of cap and trade. Within just 2 years, the exact same people were vociferously denouncing this thing that they had just run on.
I have to address a little bit of the cap and tax, is what I call it, not cap and trade, and the devastation, as was already suggested, that it would have on our country if it were to pass.
I will not and cannot align myself with a giant government slush fund.
Even worse than the financial hits that our country and we as individuals would take with cap and tax, it would so disincentivize work ethic and industry and production because we are so reliant on our energy sources.
It's cap and tax. It's cap and tax.
What changed? This was your own idea. Similarly, when Mitt Romney was governor of Massachusetts back in 2003, he liked the idea as well. Think Progress this week published this letter that Mitt Romney wrote to George Pataki, New York's governor that year. It says, quote, "I concur that climate change is beginning to affect our natural resources and that now is the time to take action toward climate protection. I believe that our joint work to create a flexible, market-based regional cap-and-trade system could serve as an effective approach to meeting these goals." What changed? Mitt Romney decided to run for president. He pulled out of the regional cap-and-trade system, and he now says that cap-and-trade is the gateway to hell. What changed?
Cap-and-trade was originally proposed by conservatives and Republicans as a market-based solution to solving environmental problems. The first president to talk about cap and trade was George H.W. Bush. Now, you've got the other party essentially saying we shouldn't even be thinking about environmental protection. Let's gut the EPA.
President Obama, the Democrats, they think they may have a winning issue here. Not in necessarily selling their own ideas about environmental protection, but rather selling the Republicans' wholesale abandonment of this issue. As Republicans for Environmental Protection strips the word Republican out of their name, are Democrats on track to strip away centrist voters, centrist Republican voters who at least used to care about the issue? Are they on track to strip those voters from a Republican Party that clearly no longer cares about that issue? Joining us now is Chris Hayes, host of Up with Chris Hayes, which you can watch every Saturday and Sunday at 8 a.m. Eastern here on MSNBC. Mr. Hayes, thank you for your time.
Always a pleasure, Rachel.
In our current politics, why does being pro-environmental protection equal weakness?
Well, There's a long, complicated answer that I will try to give a short version of, which is I think what we've seen with the environmental policy on the right is this sort of perfect alignment between the economic interests and the culture war politics. And it's sort of right out of Tom Frank's What's the Matter with Kansas book in the sense that there are huge incumbent energy interests, some of the most profitable corporations in the history of human civilization on the planet, who do not want anything like cap and trade, I mean, I call it cap and tax, to be passed because it will be bad for them, right? I mean, it will be bad for them in the sense that it must make fossil fuels more expensive. They make money by pulling fossil fuels out of the ground. What has happened is there's a lot of money pouring into revving the base up on this issue by turning it into one of these kind of symbolic culture war issues. The big bad nanny state and the socialists want to come and take your light bulbs. And they've been amazingly effective at taking the issue and making it into sort of a badge of tribal pride that you are not one of those socialist, Barack Obama loving people that wants to cap and tax. You're for industry, you're for hard work, and you're for buying your own light bulbs. So they've managed to kind of take something that wasn't a culture war issue and make it into a culture war issue.
And so, I mean, most Americans don't want to gut the EPA. Most Americans don't want, salmonella in the food supply, right? So, but are you saying that essentially those being actual results of environmentally protective policies has been disguised with the idea that it's nothing other than liberal elitism, and that none of these things have any concrete benefits to regular voters?
Partly that, yes, right? So the part of it is that the gains, in some ways, I think the environmental movement, particularly EPA, is a victim of its own success insofar as the Clean Water and Clean Air Act and things like that have been very successful, right? And so the success becomes invisible at a certain point. But I also think the terrain upon which the biggest environmental fight has happened recently, over the last 4 or 5 years, the one that you highlighted in the intro, which is climate change, is a much more abstract issue. It is a tougher political sell for the environmentalists, for Democrats, for progressives, because it is not as tangible as clean drinking, as arsenic in the drinking water, or as mass deforestation, or preserving some plot of land that everyone can take photos of and think is beautiful. And so I think Republicans saw a strategic opportunity to both do something for their benefactors in the oil industry, but also because it's a tougher position to advocate than some of the environmental fights that happened before that were more tangible.
Briefly, Chris, do you think that the Democrats do have any potential traction at getting centrist voters, at getting voters who might care about basic environmental issues, even ones that haven't been highly politicized, by caricaturing or just describing the Republican Party as being sort of radically anti-environment in a way that they weren't even just a couple of years ago?
I thought the way that you put it in the intro was exactly right, which is that it is part of a larger story about a party going off the rails. And when you can point to the top of the ticket 4 years ago, advocating a position which 2 years later they were recanting as if March before a Stalinist show trial, it shows that there's something that's gone terribly wrong in the level of ideological extremism in the Republican Party, and that feeds into something very dangerous for the Republican Party in the general election. We're seeing it now in the polling on independents and in swing states with Mitt Romney.
Chris Hayes, the host of Up with Chris Hayes, weekend mornings from 8 to 10 right here on MSNBC. Chris, thank you very much. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
Right after the show, in the last word, Lawrence O'Donnell has as his guest Abby Huntsman Livingston, one of John Huntsman's famous daughters. Together they will map out the rest of the Republican presidential race. That promises to be a good time. And here, a surprisingly gleeful correction and a Rachel Maddow Show scoop. All ahead. Stay with us.